Kaliningrad.
Kaliningrad. We had no idea they said we were checking in immigration. We went by submarines lying up on the beach, huge propellers that must have been 15, 20 feet in diameter, just sticking in the sand, rusted hulls everywhere. And we were going down this channel, and there was this big round brick structure. It looked like it was about to disintegrate into the water. But it was at the place, supposedly, where there was an office, but we slowed down here. We didn't know what was in the water, but we could follow it. We turned in, and it was a big fort with probably 100 yards, maybe a little more across. And we just floated in there hoping somebody would appear. And I honked the horn, nobody appeared. Finally, it looked like there was a place where we could possibly tie up. And all of a sudden the door opened, and this guy came out in a uniform, no hat. His tie was down here. It turned out he was pretty drunk, and I didn't know what it was. I just ran. And he motioned us into this dock-like thing. And he was drunk. But he spoke a little English. He wanted our papers. We handed him everything, and he disappeared. And we cast off as we were going to be bashed against the bricks. And finally, after about an hour, he appeared. Now he had his officer hat on and necktie. He was dressed up in his immigration uniform and motioned us in. And he said a bunch of things in Russian that we couldn't understand. We just kept saying yes. And we went out and on into the city. Well, the Neva is really a huge mud flat. Very shallow. I mean, and there were little rubber boats and inner tubes, people floating all over this area, fishing. It turns out that the people were starving, and they were all out trying to get fish. And we followed the channel into the city. And St. Petersburg, in those days, was a most distressing city. And I can go on, but basically we went in and they said, you can't tie up here. We went to they had a very fancy dock for cruise ships. They hoped to get cruise ships to go in, so they'd build a cruise ship dock. You can't stay here. You have to go around to the Baltic Yacht Club. How do we get there? Where's your chart? We had to go back out, down through all this mud flats. And then there was a place you go across, and they said, oh, you see some buoys. Well, we saw some buoys. But we worked our way across into an upper entrance to the Neva. And we arrived at the Baltic Yacht Club, which was just rusted pontoons. There were some sailboats that all belonged to the Baltic Yacht Club, but nobody really knew what they had and what they didn't have. And we tied up at one of them, and we met some really nice people, and one or two of them spoke enough English. And the guy who was in charge and who guarded the gate and everything else came out. he said, I want you to know I'm responsible for this place, and you're our guest here, and I'll guarantee you can all go ashore and be tourists, and your boat will be just fine. And we believed him, and it was. He lived up to his word for the weeks we were there.
How long were you there?
About,
10 days.
what?
10 days.
10 days.
Wow.
Maybe 2 weeks.
It was 10 days. Tracy left from there to take a train back to Helsinki. For reasons I don't remember.
She had to be somewhere.
Yeah. And
And were there taxis? How did you get around?
Bicycles.
You
There were no taxis, a
The
few
street-
buses.
There were some buses, they were fairly new. The streets were totally deserted. People looked at our bicycles with envy. There were no bicycles. The city at that point was rock bottom poor. There were women who were making loaves of bread, selling them on street corners. There were other women who were selling bags of shiitake. Well, the shiitake is where we bought mushrooms. And we could buy vegetables here and there. And just beyond the Baltic Yacht Club, there was a very obviously a bunch of dakas of the wealthy communists. And the KGB had officers had big fancy homes.
Wealthy communists. Is that a oxymoron?
And but the city, they were given money for various purposes. We saw the fanciest truck I've ever seen with Swedish license plates, with pipes, and they finally hired all the sewers in the city were stopped up. They finally contracted with a Swedish company to come in with these trucks with huge pumps to blast the sewers open. But
Anything like a restaurant or a bar? Did you?
there were some taverns, there were some places you could go in and get a beer. But it really
Not
was,
much else.
it was really depressing. We wanted to go to the what's the name of the world famous museum there? One of the greatest museums in the world is there, full of art. In fact, the Russians stole all the German art that the Germans had stolen from France, and it was all in this St. Petersburg, the
French had stolen from.
Yeah, I know what
museum.
you're talking about, but I can't.
Anyway, and they had hired the French to come in and organize the museum, so there was a French crews working there. We later, outside of St. Petersburg, there's a so-called summer palace of the czars. And the French and the English probably put $100 million into restoring that whole complex. And it was spectacular, absolutely spectacular to see how these czars lived. And you went there by boat, you couldn't go there by land. And so they were putting money into things to try to bring in the tourists. But the hotels, the Mazurka Theater, ballet theater was open. That was the only really cultural thing going. But we were there during a down period and there was nothing, so we didn't see anything there.
When you went to that place, the Tsar's Island, Dhaka, whatever, were you the only ones there as tourists?
I think so.
A few, there were very few others. We through Tom and Sandra, they had a friend whose son was principal of a school. And where do you have a school? A private school. And they had taken over some magnificent homes that were in pretty disrepair, but had been magnificent homes that belonged to the Tsar's in-laws and people, and they were turned into a private school. And we went to visit them. And they had students, there were enough people that had money to support the school. But the teachers were, in many cases, had been in the service, had been engineers, had been scientists, had been all sorts. We met one guy, he was from Armenia, and had been was a engineer, structural engineer. And his job was to design the bases for nuclear reactors. They had no money, so they weren't building nuclear reactors. He didn't have enough money to get from St. Petersburg to Armenia, so he was teaching math to these grammar school kids. Really nice guy. We were walking down one street, and there was this big plaque on the door. That here was, who was it that sang there? The Beatles? No. Somebody, some singer, some famous singer had sung from that building. And then right beyond it, there was a building. All these buildings looked alike. They were all designed like they were just square boxes. Nothing but square ugliness. And these balconies were broken off, many of them. And one of them they showed us. There was a party one night on it. And there was a party on the balcony underneath. And it finally just broke off from the building and killed about 10 people on the balcony underneath it. And they came down into the street. I'm told we would not recognize the city today. It's alive, it's vibrant.
I imagine.
But it was an amazing adventure.
Is that the only time that you were in St. Petersburg?
Yeah.
Well, it's getting late. I think Mom's voice is getting tired.
Yeah, Don,
Yeah,
you're
I'm
talking
worn
for
out.
3 hours straight. I'm amazed you're still going.
I'm worn out.
What would you like?
Worry about a neck, though.
Oh, I had the crud riding a bicycle.
You got the crud?
The diarrhea.
That's what I thought you meant.
And I finally, I was really sick. I finally collapsed on a lawn, in a park.
In a park.
And I got my pants down. Reva probably, as usual, had one piece of Kleenex. I was as felt as sick as I've ever felt in my life.
You didn't just keep riding, Mom?
I should have.
She had the Kleenex.
Yeah. No, I came back and waited for him.
Boy, I was sick.
You and Tom were the only two that got.
From water, perhaps, or?
Well,
What were you
we
eating?
took our own water, our own food, our own fuel, everything. We went planning not to buy anything, not to, just
We
because
bought,
we were told that.
we bought shiitake mushrooms. We
We
bought
did.
bread.
And we bought vodka,
A beer, we bought beer.
but we didn't buy much. We didn't.
You don't,
Did you have people asking you to change money or give them things or something?
No, we were at a funny little place called the Yacht Club. It really wasn't, but it was a place we could tie up.
Because when Lori and I were in Prague, before that even, so the
Yes.
Iron Curtain was still up, it was, everyone was asking you to change money, give them either American or just even Western currency.
But
they didn't
did
have
you
any
do it?
change.
They didn't have anything to change, they just wanted to give you worthless money and have you give them worthful money.
Yeah.
But we would go to picnic, have a picnic in a park. There were beautiful parks, maintained. The minute we went under the grass, people would scream at us.
You're not allowed to go on the grass. No, no, no.
And then other Russians that spoke English would come and say, that was the old days. You have your picnic on the grass. During the Russian days, if you were in the park, you stayed on the park.
Well, I hope you tell Bernie Sanders all that. He obviously never went there. No days.
Well, it was an amazing experience. And sailing back to Finland, we sailed all night, and we arrived at the Finnish island at about 4 in the morning, and we put an anchor down, and everybody went to bed. And a few minutes later, I heard a boat come alongside, and the guy came out, bang, bang, bang. He came up, and he was a hard-ass Finnish immigration guy. He follow me, now. And we've been driving on, can we come in? No, you come now. We pulled him in and followed him into the city of Kasha, which is right across from Russia. And they weren't sure what we were bringing from Russia, and they eventually let us go, but they wanted to go over everything, they went all through the boat.
They'd probably never seen boats come from Russia.
Yeah, they
Other than commercial boats.
I'm sure they wanted to see our boat. A couple times we've been stopped by people demanding that they were looking for,
Drugs.
contraband drugs or whatever. But then the workers who do speak a little English have almost always said they know there's nothing, but they've been told to find it, so they're furious. They're afraid that they'll get chastised for not finding what they are looking for.
The worst event like that was, you saw the movie Dust Boat.
Yeah.
Those sub-pens off La Rochelle, La Cité in the south of France. We were 5 miles offshore heading up the French coast. And 2 or 3 guys in a boat, just a simple outboard boat. They were dressed not in uniform, in business clothes. They were mechanics or just 2 fishermen. They came alongside and said, follow us. Not in your life. They came really close, and they undid these things and showed all their badges. Follow us. And they did have guns. So I followed them, and we went into La Cité, which is where all the sub-pens are. By coincidence, just before we got in, 4 German patrol craft pulled in. It was the first time German ships had been in that harbor since the Germans had their sub-pens there in World War II. So they were tied up along the quay, and we were right behind the last of the German boats in. And people started to gather, they saw the American flag in our little boat. And a car pulled up, and all these guys got out. And the 3 guys that ordered us to come in were still around. They went in and showed the paper, showed our passport, showed everything to the guy we had, the man in the brown suit. And I went ashore to try to speak to him. He spoke perfect English. He said, you will not speak to me, I will speak to you. I said, why are we being stopped? He went through, I am here to ask you questions. You will not, you get back in that boat and don't get off again or you will be arrested. And I didn't really want to be arrested. By this time, there were probably 50, 60 French people all around the fence and the rail, looking down to see what was going on. And Ted Shellings was with us. I don't know who else. You and I obviously were there.
Gay was there.
Gay was there. And he sent people into the boat to search it. He sent divers down under the hull to see if we had any things welded onto the hull that could be filled with contraband.
They sent for dogs
The dogs to
that could smell out drugs.
smell out anything on the boat. They spent 4 or 5 hours. Finally, I was down in the engine room with 2 of the guys that had been offshore. One of them had worked as a narc exchange with the United States in the Newark Harbor, New Jersey. So he spoke pretty good English. He said, "You're clean. We know you're clean." But that guy in the brown suit, he has got probably 15 men, hours of time, all invested in this operation. And if he doesn't come up with something, he's in for a very hard time at headquarters. So we'll do what we can do to help you. He wanted to open our water tanks, take all those bolts out. They were looking to see if the painted chip, whether we had taken them out and filled the water tank with stuff. And they were pretty full. We just filled them coming out of Bordeaux. Royal. And I was walking, I did go ashore and I was walking up and down, and this Frenchman spoke to me, and he said, and handed me his card. And he said, "I'm a banker in town. I've been watching this. How can I help?" I gave him a card with Wallace Baker's name and number on it. That if we're still here tonight, call this man in Paris and tell him what's going on. He took the card. He said, "This is really ridiculous." He said, "I'm embarrassed for the French." The man in the brown suit finally called all of his men, sent them away, slammed the door, and drove off.
Beforehand, I had gone up, because I spoke a little French at the time, and so I went up to him when he was standing alone on the sidewalk and tried to speak to him. He wouldn't even speak to me, but he spat at me and told me to leave, and so I did. I wisely left, but he...
You're lucky they didn't plant something on you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Either
Yeah.
there or in Russia, more likely in Russia.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's guy that had originally been on that little boat that brought us in. I said, how did you know? This is the interesting part. Why did you come out here? How did you know we were 5 miles of sea, headed up toward, I forgot the name of the island we were headed for? And he didn't want to tell us. But he finally said, "Well, you checked out at Royan, which is this town at the end of the Canal de Midi, where you go south to Spain or north to Brest." And they wrote down the names of your crew, and one of the names triggered as a drug runner.
Abbie Benfield?
No, but it was,
Ted Shellings.
it wasn't, it was close to that.
Yeah, the guy's name?
Schiller.
Schiller.
But they
Schiller,
thought it was
Schiller.
Schellins.
And so all of a sudden we're still sitting there. All of a sudden a car pulls up. And I've got these 3 Coast Guards, 2 Coast Guardsmen from Royan. They'd driven south for an hour or so anyway, more, and brought the Coastguardsmen up to identify us as a boat, point out Kit Challenge, get with this boat, we should eat his pants. And,
Yeah, he was not a happy camper.
and get his passport and check him out. And that really ended it when they had obviously totally misidentified the boat. Kit was pretty scared. But we had several minor incursions like that of people. One in Belgium. They were very nice, they just let us go. We were in violation of something. Probably on the wrong side of the river.
Oh, they were.
And, but those are the two scariest times we had. Russia and the Germans were just, and all the crewmen were on the back of this boat watching this American yacht. And they thought it was hysterical.
Is that a good place to stop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, thank you
Awesome.
all.
Thank you.
Yeah, your memory's pretty good, Grandpa.